on today's StoryBeat.
Inevitably, just about everybody who showed me their work would stop by saying this, it's not very good, this, but to which I would, of course, have to say, well, why are you showing it me then? You've got to believe in your stuff, because if you don't, why should anybody else believe it? And if you don't, then get a good agent.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Well, joining me for the second time on StoryBeat is the author, editor, and manager Tim Quinn, who was born and raised in Liverpool, England, the home of the Beatles. Tim began his show business journey as a clown at Blackpool Tower Circus, followed by working as a scriptwriter for various comedians of the period. Comic books came next, as Tim worked as a writer and editor for Britain's top periodicals, followed by a long stint at Marvel Comics. Tim also conducted interviews for newspapers and magazines with stars from the entertainment world, followed by many years creating documentaries for London Weekend Television's South Bank show. During that time, he was also working as an editor for the Saturday Evening Post. Tim and his wife Jane created the publishing company Quill Publications and a music business, Mighty Quinn Management. Tim's latest novel, Bigger Than the Beatles, tells the story of a Liverpool boy who picked up a guitar in 1957 and went on to global success with his band, the Dream Daffodils. We follow his story across the years until his final death tour in 2025. Many of Tim and Jane's real-life experiences in the music business are incorporated into the book. I've read Bigger Than the Beatles and can tell you it's all that you'd expect from a Tim Quinn book. Exceptional, incisive writing that's filled with a huge helping of clever humor about the Liverpool music scene. I thoroughly enjoyed reading Bigger Than the Beatles and highly recommend it to you. It's the second book of Tim's that I've had the pleasure to read, the other being The Jolly Bloodbath. Tim has also published his autobiography, Arg, which I encourage you to check out. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm delighted to welcome the brilliant writer, editor, and manager Tim Quinn back for his second spin in the StoryBeat barrel. Tim, it's so great to have you on the show again.
Steve, it's a delight. I've been listening to your shows and always enjoy them. Highlight.
Thank you.
The month, the week, whatever, So it's great to be back and have this connection.
Well, I appreciate it. I greatly do, and I'm so happy to have you on again. So let's go back in time just a little bit. You've obviously spent years in various corners of the entertainment industry. You're, multi-talented in many different ways, including writing for comedians, comic books, and music management. Why do you think you've gone down so many different paths in your career?
Because I keep getting fired.
No, that'll do it.
No, I think early on I realized not to put all my eggs in one basket, although they all are connected. These eggs are all connected. And, for example, so I was doing comic strips for years when suddenly, in a single bound, I started making documentaries. And initially I was concerned that I don't know if I can do this, because that's quite a leap. But it's not. It's actually not a leap in any way whatsoever.
Why is it not a leap?
Because if you're telling stories, and I've done every kind of comic strip imaginable, from daily 3-framers in a newspaper to 24 pages or beyond to graphic novels. But when you tell a story, you tell a story. And when you do a documentary, guess what? You're just telling a story. You just it's not on paper, it's on film. So it's pretty much the same process. You want to get, a good story out of it. And luckily, the very first documentary that I put together, well, I could have done it with my eyes closed, quite frankly, because it was the story of Marvel Comics. So it connected very closely to me. And
that's where you met Stan Lee, right?
Well, I'd already met Stan because I had Stan working for me at the Saturday Evening Post magazine. Because when I got the job at the Saturday Evening Post as one of the editors there, I suddenly realized that, well, it opened every door in America to me. Because it was a very well-respected magazine because of its rich history. And I thought, I bet Stan likes the Saturday Evening Post because of Norman Rockwell, and I mean, it truly is. When you look back through, particularly through the 50s and 60s, it's an amazing magazine. I have
Indeed.
a billion copies here in my office. A terrific magazine. And sure enough, when I approached Stan with the idea of getting him to do something for the Post, he was on board instantly. And it's one of my happiest pieces of memorabilia, my first letter from Stan way back. And that connected us. And it turned out Stan actually knew one of the daily strips that I was producing, even though at that point I was living in Indiana, where the Post was situated. But Stan knew one of the daily strips I was writing back in the UK. Now, bear in mind, Stan had been my hero since I was 7 years of age, and this was before he'd started creating the Marvel superheroes. I loved the work he was doing on what were sort of Twilight Zone type comic books, that were quite fantastic. So I was well aware of his name way back when I was 7. So it was fantastic to be able to get this opportunity to reach out and actually get him to do some work for me. But through that, we got to know each other, and that led to all sorts of things in my life.
Indeed. Eventually Marvel, I assume that's part of that.
Yeah, quite, yeah. Although I had done some work for Marvel before that. It's a very bizarre life that I've led. And I apologize for creaking. I'm so old. If listeners
We're
hear
both
me creaking,
old and
actually my
creaky.
chair, and I'm trying to sit still. It is an odd life because it veers all over the place, but with good reason. And it's kind of, for me, it's interesting. In the last year, I've, for the first time, been reading the journals and diaries written by my wife and I from when we first met way back in the early 80s. And it's that we always kept journals, but we never read them because you don't. So now, all these years later, it's quite fascinating to read of things that almost happened and indeed things that did happen.
And as you say, you have had a very rich and varied career and life's experiences. You've been all over the map with some things, many of them, if not most of them, very, very successful.
Oh, I have to jump in there and say the majority of them completely unsuccessful.
Unsuccessful.
But no, because I think that's the way it is in the arts.
It really is. It truly is.
It is. For every success, there's probably 49 things that didn't quite make it.
Well, I think that's what most people that are trying to be in the business in some way, whatever end of it they want to be in, they all they see in the trades and in the news are the successes. They don't see the many failures that it took to get to the success.
Well, that's interesting you should say that, because when I returned to the UK after living in the States for years, my old school saw that there was something in a local paper about me, a return of prodigal or whatever. And my old school contacted me and said that they would like me to come along to prize giving day and be the guest speaker. And could I talk about my success? I immediately remembered my time at that school and the hideous day that was always prize giving day, when they get some old codger in, usually from the armed forces or the church, and he'd drone on for hours about how great he was. And I thought, I'm not doing that. But I said, I'll come along, but only if I can talk about my failures. I said, because if there's any kids at that school who are looking to enter the arts, then they have to realize that, the first thing you have to manage is how you cope with having failures.
Absolutely.
And so they couldn't quite grasp what I was on about, the teachers. But I did go along. My ego would not allow me to turn that gig down.
Well, we're going to talk more about Bigger Than the Beatles in a bit, but you've incorporated even that concept of going back to your school. That's in Bigger Than the Beatles as well, isn't it?
It is, because you mentioned before that I've written my autobiography. Really, I've written my autobiography twice.
As almost like a roman à clef.
And I didn't realize it until I was 2/3 of the way through writing Bigger Than the Beatles, which is supposed to be the autobiography of this Liverpool guy who was 17 in 1957 when he picked up a guitar. And we follow his career all the way through to the present day when he's now in his 80s. And I was about 2/3 of the way through writing the book. And we follow, every step of the way. So from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, how he has to adapt and whatever. And I was about 2/3 of the way through when I suddenly realized, oh my God, this guy's actually me. Now, that might seem obvious as I'm the writer of the thing, but it hadn't been obvious to me.
So you didn't start out writing it with yourself as the principal character.
No, not at all. In fact, my idea, the reason I've written this book is quite simple. At one point in our lives, Jane, my darling wife, and I formed a management company for recording artists. So the reason we did that was because I'm the only guy to come out of Liverpool in the 60s who can't play or sing a note. But I adore music, as indeed does Jane. So it was a natural sort of move for us into the music world to work with artists that we adored and loved. And it proved to be quite successful. We proved to be quite successful at that. I've been speaking about failures, but this was a wise move. And thanks to that move, I'm sitting in a house with a roof over my head.
How did you decide to go into that sort of world? What caused it?
Very simply, because one of the most exciting publishing ventures that Jane and I worked on was a children's magazine called Blue Moon. And it was sequels to fairy tales. What happened next to Snow White and Jack of the Beanstalk and so on, and all these characters. Anyway, we adored it. And it started being used in literacy hour in schools. But not enough people were buying it. But our business sense went out the window. We were led by our heart because we kept hearing from kids who loved it. And we kept it going way beyond the time that we should have canned it. And I managed to lose every penny we had made up to that point, to lose our house as well. And this was at age 49, which isn't a good time to start over.
No, that's not a good time to start over.
It's fine in your 20s. It's fine in your 30s, even in your 40s, kind of up to a point, but not when you're 49, going on 50. And the next 2 years, so we'd been living it up, a beautiful house and whatever, lost everything. And we ended up living in a garden shed for the next 2 years. But I must qualify that because the garden shed was in a millionaire district outside London. And it was owned by a wonderful singer. And listeners, if you're in America and you haven't heard of this woman, you will adore her. Please track her down on YouTube. Her name is Julie Felix. She was American-Mexican, and she had had huge success in Britain back in the 60s, thanks to David Frost. Wonderful, wonderful artist. And Jane and I collided with her one day, and she'd had an equally interesting life. But due to the ridiculous state of the music business, she had kind of hit hard times. And in many ways, it was due to having a manager from hell who was useless. And I said as much to Julie one day. You've got to find a new agent and manager. And she turned on me. She said, well, look, if you think you can do better, do it yourself. The first thing Jane and I did was to contact all our friends in the business and say, do you know a good agent or manager? And they all said the same thing. There's no such thing. So Jane and I at that point thought, I wonder if we could be that good agent manager. And that's what got us into the business.
So necessity is the mother of invention.
Isn't it just? But representing Julie Felix. So we were off to a cracking start because we had an artist who we believed in, 100%.
That helps.
And loved. In fact, loved. And so we went that extra mile. And within a year, we had her on 40-date tours of the UK. and we were recording a wonderful double album called Starry-Eyed and Laughing, which was her take on Bob Dylan's career. Julie she was a true sex bomb of the 60s, but her voice it's just sheer joy. So Julie Felix, listeners, please have a look. You will be blown away, I guarantee, no matter what.
So you that was part of your,
That got us in, and we were successful. So within a couple of years, we had people coming to us, people like Kiki D, for example, asking us to take them on. And we also started bringing in artists to the UK from Australia, artists who were unknown over here. But we would put them on successful tours of the UK. So it was enormous fun. And to go out on tour with them, as roadie, come manager, come agent, it was a blast. And it allowed us to work with some of the biggest names as well. Because we occasionally would do a charity show for some charity or other. And we'd bring in one case, John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, and then Bill Wyman and the Rhythm Kings. So, it was Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, who brilliant band. We were revitalized by the time we were in our early 50s, and it led to all sorts. And
were you still writing that whole time?
Yeah. I didn't stop that, but this took a lot of time because we wanted our company to be small. We wanted it to be us, just us, Jane and me. We didn't want to be Warner Brothers. I think there are pluses and minuses to having a small company, but there are pluses and minuses to being in a big company because you can get overlooked or whatever. So, we did literally spend 24 hours a day working for our artists, and it showed. So it was a joyous experience.
So it was a labor of love for you.
Total labor of love, and it's tough. It's kind of tough. Well, it's not going down the pit, is it? But it's all worthwhile on the night when you're standing at the side of the stage watching these amazing people close up, And in pretty much every case, all the joy to work for.
How did doing that contribute to Bigger Than the Beatles?
Yeah. So the book. Oh, I tell you, it's after every gig, we would celebrate, and our artists would usually get slightly inebriated, whoever that was, not to name names. But we would start hearing some of the most amazing stories, particularly from these artists who'd been around since the 50s and 60s. And Jane and I would always come away saying, isn't it a drag that we're so professional that we can't tell these stories to anybody because we're professional, aren't we? And it wouldn't be right, which of course was true. But as time went on and people started dying just because of age, and I realized that my time on this planet is coming to a close, I thought, I don't want these stories to die with me. And so the idea came of creating a story, creating a book, a novel, so a fiction, if you like, ho-ho, but to incorporate some of these wonderful tales that we had heard along the way into it. And so it came to pass that Bigger Than the Beatles was born, and it kicks off with this guy picking up a guitar and then forming a band in Liverpool in the late 50s.
The guy you're talking about, his name is Mike Simon, right?
His name is Mike Simon, yeah, which I don't understand that. I have to say at this stage, I don't understand why I call him Mike Simon, because my former elder brother is called Mike Simon, and I can't stand him. So quite why I chose to call this guy, who I like, and who, as it turned out, is me, after this guy that I cannot bear, go figure. The workings of the human mind are very peculiar.
There's far more deep psychology in there than it's above my pay grade.
No, there is indeed. Either that, or it can be summed up just by saying we're all nuts, which I suspect is true.
So do you think that Mike Simon, despite this being your brother who you don't care for, do you think that it's you trying to to work your own being into the story, which you didn't realize until late in the game anyway.
Why, Steve, that sounds crazy. How could that possibly be? The quick answer to that is I've no idea. I've absolutely no idea. I need to be lying on a couch with Dr. Freud, I think, to figure this one out.
Well, you're not going to get that here today. I'll tell you that for sure.
No, it was interesting when I realized this. And at that point, as well, I realized that there'd been no romance really in this guy's life, apart from the romance of celebrity, which is far from being romantic, really. So,
that's false romance. That's not real.
Well,
romance.
Quite. It's what passes for romance in a lot of people. And so I thought, my gosh, well, then I know the very girl for this, the very woman who would fill this spot. And so I introduced into the book my own Wonder Woman, Jane Quinn, but changed her name almost. I kept her name as Jane, but changed the Quinn bit. And it really worked well. It worked well because I was able to pull from Jane's life, because, you were talking about my life, but there's no comparison really to Jane's life. Jane is a woman who grew up in Indiana in the Midwest, farm girl, and went on to do quite remarkable things in her life, not least marrying me. so there was a lot of copy there to pull from, character-wise and personality-wise. This amazing woman. I thought he's going to have an amazing woman in his life because, a lot of my favorite pops and rock stars do. And I'm always interested in the backstory. Sort of, well, okay, we know this person, but who's the woman behind the throne? I guess in this kind of case, Dickens is a good example of that. I'm fascinated by Charles Dickens's wife, and then his girlfriend. And it's a fascinating tale. And then of course, John and Yoko, Paul and Linda, Bianca Jagger. There's a story waiting to be told, if ever there was one.
Well, Jagger's got a number of those kinds of stories hanging around him.
Well, he does, but I think
not just one.
Bianca in particular was quite fascinating.
So you clearly, when you read the book, the listeners may not know this, but unfortunately, recently Jane passed away, and I read much of your discussion about it online when I was, because I follow you online as well, and you go through many experiences in the book that take us through her death. The character Jane Gatewood in the book, you take us through her death. Did you find writing that to be cathartic for you to get it out?
No, nothing is cathartic as far as Jane's death goes. No, it wasn't a good idea.
Wasn't a good idea? Why?
What wasn't a good idea was the dying. Wasn't a good idea.
Definitely not.
I don't believe it. Dying is the worst. So I wasn't going to get beyond that.
And yet there's nothing more universal in the human experience.
No, I know. It's fascinating. That is quite fascinating in a way. And I guess, I didn't want to just dump a load of grief onto my readers, because I like to think most of the things I've done in my life have had humor attached to them. That's a necessity as somebody born and bred in Liverpool.
You celebrate her in the book, Tim. You don't.
No, exactly that. Exactly that. That was truly my intent. That here is this amazing person. So of course she has to go into it, and I think she worked well and gave an extra dimension to the main character of the book, which is Mike Simon.
You even have a very short chapter in the book, maybe 2/3 or further in which she's already gone and a book leaps off the shelf in the room. Is that something that actually happened to you?
It did. The month after Jane died. Now, I actually, Jane and I live in this old Victorian house here, just outside Liverpool. And if you walked in, you would think you're in a library, because we've got like 10,000 books and bookshelves and so on. So all sorts of books, books going way back to my childhood, books that I've written, books that she wrote, but books we've loved through our time. So about 3 weeks after she died, one of those books chose to leap off the shelf in front of me. And I picked it up. And now had it been a copy of Old Curiosity Shop or the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, I would probably have thought no more about it. But it was a book Jane had written.
That's wild.
And this happened 3 times in different rooms on different shelves. And
Wow.
It set me thinking that I've always had bookshelves from when I was a kid. And this was the first time I've had books actually leap off the bookshelves, because I know how to put books on bookshelves. If I've learned one thing in this life, it's that. So it was one of those strange moments. The 4th time, it was not a book Jane had written, but it was her most beloved book, which is Peter Pan, a copy of Peter Pan.
Wow.
Which is her favorite book of all time, which says something about her. And it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's one thing to have words leap off the page, but it's another thing to have the book leap off the shelf. That's
the Peter
very
Pan
interesting.
book, not only did it leap off the shelf, but it actually hit me.
It hit you.
So that was quite something. It was quite a leap.
Did you take that as a message of some kind?
Well, of course. And you know what? For 10 minutes, I was slightly cheered. And then, of course, after 10 minutes, you need it again, and you need it more, because I am like Doubting Thomas, or whatever his name was, who needs to thrust my hand into the wound in Christ's side to prove that it is him. So as far as the whole thing being cathartic goes, no, not in the least, because nothing has the power to be that.
Well, some authors, notoriously get rid of their own demons by writing them out, and then they disappear for them.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but this is one demon that I can't get rid of. It's an angel, actually. It's an angel that nor would I want to. Not that means I'm happy in my grief. I'm not. It's bloody horrible, as anybody listening will be aware, And I think most people who are all very sweet and very nice, and they'll say, oh, well, give it time. Time's a great healer. Time is not a great healer whatsoever when you've got, when you've been lucky enough to have love like this. It's far from being a great healer. With every passing second, it's torture. I hesitate to use words like torture, because people are being tortured, but it is. It's a mental anguish, no question. You see, for years I was Tim and Jane, and I refuse to just be Tim now. I am Tim and Jane, and that's why Jane was in the book.
So Mike himself eventually, I don't want to give anything away too much, but eventually he goes through the end of his life as well in the book. And
well, it's what he calls, so he's going out, thanks to his agent, on this tour in his 80s, which is kind of absurd. Now, of course, there are people who are doing this, such as Ringo, such as Paul, and they're fantastic, even Bruce Springsteen's getting up there, and they're absolutely wonderful. But most people who reach their 70s are not in quite as good shape as those guys. You are falling apart at the seams. I certainly noticed it by the time I hit 68, that, what I used to be able to do in a flash was no longer possible. And certainly, heading further into my 70s. But I will often have people say, oh, well, look at Paul McCartney. Yeah. Mind you, we don't see him the day after the concert, do we?
No, but I've seen him put on that 2.5, 3 hour concert. I've seen it live, and it is absolutely remarkable.
Oh, totally.
And he goes for 2.5 or 3 hours and never takes a drink of water.
Well, he's a remarkable man. And I know why he doesn't take a drink of water, because he'll have to go
pee.
Because that goes. I found that if I no longer drink after midday, I can actually sleep through the night. But if I drink after midday, I'm doomed to getting up and down. So the joy of old age is.
Mike realizes in the book that his game is up. You actually use that term, the game is up. and he obviously you're expressing that he feels that he's finished. But I'm questioning you, Tim, that until death is certain, a creative person's life is never really finished, is it?
Apparently not, because it was back in January. So I finished this book in January, and in February and March we launched the Peace Wall, the children's Peace Wall at the Liverpool Beatles Museum. I'm an ambassador for the Liverpool Beatles Museum, by the way. And I really felt, you know what, I'm not going to top this. This is a good thing to bow out on. But since that time, I seem to be doing stuff still.
Of
So
course.
it's still coming my way. I'm asked to give talks here and there on different aspects of my life and career. And
Your brain doesn't shut off. You continue to think of these things.
it's sort of flickering a bit, my brain. It might not shut off completely, but it's on the way to shutting off. And I was keen to stop with projects that I was proud of. And I'm proud of Bigger Than the Beatles, and I'm proud of the Peace Wall, which Rogue and Pete at the museum have told me it's a permanent exhibit
Nice.
until there's no wall, which means it's a permanent exhibit. The Children's Peace Wall at the Liverpool. And it's the last thing you see when you go through the museum. There's like 10,000 Beatle artifacts in there, beautiful, really personal artifacts connected to Pete and his time in the band. And then the rest connected to John, Paul, George and Ringo, thanks to Neil Aspinall, who is Rogue's dad. So it's a fascinating experience, but you come out down this long, long wall that's called the Children's Peace Wall. So it's the final thing you see at the museum. And I think that really is a tip of the hat to the Beatles, whose message to the world was all you need is love and give peace a chance. And,
Yeah, indeed.
The word is love. You know.
How many songs did they, produce that were about peace and love? There were many, many, many songs.
Quite. That's it, really. That's my Bible, I've lived by that as much as I can, apart from the times when I'm really angry with people. But I pretty much try to remember all you need is love and to give peace a chance, apart from in some nitwits.
So in the book, Mike reflects on an obituary written about him in The Guardian, which happens for celebrities where there are obituaries written in advance of their death. That's a common practice. I'm just curious, have you reflected that when your time comes, do you know how you want to be remembered?
No, I honestly don't care. I couldn't care less, and I seriously, I don't care. I guess maybe occasionally I might have thought it's kind of interesting that these books and comics and things that are on YouTube from TV shows that I've been a part of will still be here long after I've gone.
That's the way I look at the stuff I've churned out. It'll be here long after I'm gone.
Well, I find that kind of interesting. Particularly some of the interviews I've done with people who interest me and fascinate me. So, yeah, I'm not. I was going to say I'm not ego driven, but that's probably rubbish because the ego's, of course, in there. But no, when I started doing interviews, this is interviews for newspapers, back when I was still in my teens, I was very keen to take myself out of the interview because I didn't think that anybody would be interested in me. Why would they? They're tuning in because I'm interviewing somebody interesting who's in the news or whatever. And so that was my natural inclination at creating a good interview. And it was the same when we did the South Bank show. That was the way that worked. That, you'd be there interviewing these people, but you'd pluck yourself out in the editing and just let them talk. So as far as being remembered goes, no, we're all, I'm Ozymandias.
You're interested in having your work be remembered, but not necessarily you.
No, I don't even care if that's remote. I don't. It's been fun to work on, and I'm particularly delighted where kids get it. If some of the comic books and books that I've written are actually enjoyed by children, then I'm really happy about that. But simply because books have given me such a joy through my whole life from when I was nothing. So
So I'm curious, when you were conceiving the book, did you know in advance what the book would be, or were you writing it was it coming to you as you were writing it?
I thought it would be wonderful to write of that of the music business through those years from 1957, because my memories are, I would have been 5 years of age in 57, 6 years of age, but I remember it really well. In that, I remember the music that was hitting. And it was, of course, rock and roll from the States. It was Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis, of course. But it was also a homegrown talent, a guy called Lonnie Donegan, who created over here what's known as the skiffle phase, which is truly what got most British artists into rock and roll, because there was a simplicity to what he did, and that's not putting it down in any way whatsoever. You try doing something simple, it's the most difficult thing ever. But it allowed these guys to pick up guitars and follow his lead. And I remembered that well. And I thought, yeah, if I'd been a bit older then, I'd have been doing exactly that, picking up a guitar and attempting to get in on that scene. It wouldn't have worked with me because I have no natural rhythm.
Didn't John Lennon and McCartney, didn't they basically start out doing skiffle music?
Yeah, they did. And, it's a wonderful, vibrant kind of music. And it's easy to play, apparently, for everybody except myself. So there you go. I did buy a guitar eventually in 1963, and I bought a book to go with it called Playing a Day. The problem was the book didn't tell me which day it would be that I play. So I still have a guitar in this office, and I'm as useless today as I was back in '63 on it. But it's something I've accepted. I can't dance, and I have no rhythm, no natural rhythm.
Yes, but you have a capacity for words, and that's an art form unto itself.
Yeah, it's not the same as being a Beatle.
Well, I don't think there's too much in the world that is like being a Beatle.
No, I don't. And whenever I do think of the Beatles, I often think this. I think we got the better deal, we being the people. Because I don't, the Beatles, it was work. And yeah, obviously they were having a lot of fun, certainly in the early days. But I don't think they had the amount of fun that we got by going on that first day of sale and picking up a new Beatles album and reading every word on the back of it and studying the picture on the front and then listening to every track. By that stage to them, it was their job. It was work. And so they kind of missed out on the Beatles, I think, by being a Beatle.
They were on the giving end, not the receiving end, and the receivers were all getting the benefit of what they were giving.
Absolutely. And anyway, that's why the book's called Bigger Than the Beatles, because it's an absurd title, because nothing
ever, no, and nothing I think ever will. Mike's partner, his writing partner and his playing partner is a guy named Richard McAdam. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Richard McAdam, yeah.
McAdam. And so where did these two characters come from? I obviously you didn't.
Well, from my past. Now, obviously Mike turned into me in the way that I think and have thought for many, many years. Slightly pissed off, slightly angry with the state of the world, with the state of the music industry, with a lot of things, really. Richard McAdam was this beautiful boy who was at my school. He looked like an English lord or something, like he should be Lord Byron or something. Absolutely good. And all the girls swooned at his feet. And I just liked his name. It's a great name, Richard McAdam. And he was kind of off his rocker in many ways. I remember being on a railway train going from where we lived in a suburb of Liverpool into Liverpool. And he was reading a newspaper, and then he took out a box of matches and he set the newspaper on fire in this carriage. And it caught light to the seating. And the guy was kind of bonkers, but he was getting off on this, and yeah, which just makes him sound horrible, of course, or really stupid. But he was more than that. He was Well, he was a real character. So I wanted to put him in. I didn't put that scene in because I thought, well, it's hard to make anybody like him if you start off with that scene and that's back when he was about 14. But his attitude was interesting, and his contempt for our teachers I enjoyed at our school, because we had teachers who deserved contempt. They were Irish Christian brothers who were far from being Christian in my eyes, second only to the Gestapo. So our contempt for them was shared. So that's where Richard came from, and I don't know if he's still alive or not. I did see him a few years ago, bumped into him. He looked like death then, but I know he'll have no problem with me using his name or indeed his personality in the book.
So as you were thinking about writing the book, did you have a certain audience in mind that you were heading toward?
Yeah, and I suppose that audience would have been my generation, which probably isn't that good an idea, really, because we're dying off. But I would also like to think that anybody who's into music, and I meet a lot of young people now who are into the music of the 50s and the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to think there's hope that they will get a kick out of it, because not only does it sort of play through the 50s and 60s, but it does go on to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and at one point they end up at Live Aid together with Bob Geldof and Bob Dylan. So we have these guest stars who pop up in the book, including the Beatles themselves, because they have to, they have to meet these
Well,
guys.
you've got many celebrities in the book. You've got Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh and Elvis. And you have all these. So
again, all connected to me.
In what way?
Elizabeth Taylor had to be in there. I was 15 years of age, and I went down to London to see Hair, the musical. This was in 1968, I think. And Hair was the big thing at that moment, or one of the many big things that were out at that time. And I went along to see that, but I went to another play in Shaftesbury Avenue the day after. And I was sitting waiting for the curtain to go up when who should walk in but Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton and her son, who was about 15. And the three of them glistened. They were at their peak as far as beauty goes. And they sat in the row directly in front of me.
Whoa.
And of course, all through the show, which was a very good show called 40 Years On, but the whole audience I was so conscious of the audience watching this trio, and particularly Liz. Liz shone more than anybody else, of course, because she was bedecked in jewels. And I don't think before that point I'd given much thought to her, other than that she was Cleopatra. But she outshone Cleopatra that night. It was fascinating to be that close to somebody who was so stunningly beautiful. It was like being in a fairy tale for that few hours. I sat behind her. Interestingly, what I took from it, though, was that because there was humor in the play, and she had the dirtiest laugh I've ever heard from anybody. So that was kind of interesting.
She had a bawdy laugh.
She did indeed.
Did you have to do much research on any of the characters in the book, the actual real life characters, or did you just know them all from your cultural experiences?
Well, I knew them from my cultural experience. So, so obviously after that night at the theatre, I went off and learned everything I could about Elizabeth Taylor because I'd fallen head over heels in love with her as a 15-year-old. But alas, it was not to be for whatever reason. And so it is with pretty much everybody else that I put into the book. I've had an interest in them one way or the other, right down to Lenny the Lion, who was a very famous ventriloquist dummy back at the end of the 50s into the early 60s, and he even had his own TV series, and he had the Beatles on as a guest one week, and indeed Mike Simon's band, before they changed their name to the Dream Daffodils, they go on this show with disastrous consequences. Lenny the Lion. But Lenny the Lion was huge, you know, a bit like what's the vent act in the States that was big? McCarthy, what was it?
It's Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. So I had to put them in because, again, it captures the period. It's a very strange period as the Beatles came to fame because the musical or vaudeville was still big over here. And the Beatles were kind of a part of that in a way, you know. And some of the Christmas shows they did over here, they were doing sketches, you know, absolutely absurd, silly sketches, you know, very vaudeville, very musical.
Rock and roll was sort of still a new being born thing. It hadn't become what it became.
Yeah. Well, anybody with any sense thought it was the route to becoming an all-round performer. And that would involve getting into movies or TV or whatever, ending up maybe as a TV presenter or something. You know, who knows? It was a new world that was being created before our eyes. So kind of interesting to see that. I think 1963 is fascinating as far as the Beatles' career goes, before they hit America, as they take over the UK. You know, January the 1st, nobody's heard of them outside Liverpool, but month in, cartoonists in newspapers are featuring them. Suddenly, bang, please me, open that door to everything.
Yeah.
See, as I start talking about all of this, this is my passion and a love of mine in life, that period and time. So it was inevitable that I would write this book, a novel set through that period and beyond. And to try and figure out how anybody who went through that would then cope with the nonsense that we have to go through today in every way. I mean, I just view this new century as being idiotic. We're living through the age of unreason.
Well, I think that's a whole other conversation for another day. But how long did it take you from the inception that you're going to write this book? How long did it take to actually write it and finish it?
About 5 years, which is insane.
5 years.
There's a reason for that. It's because I reached a point in it where I couldn't figure out how to end it. And I didn't want to do the obvious, which is, we just have him die because he's old. I didn't want to do that. I needed something, John. And then it was last November, my publisher, lovely woman.
Teddy Dallin.
Teddy Dallin, yeah.
And in fact, Teddy is a guest on this show. She'll precede your show.
Oh, fantastic. Well, she is truly astonishing. And last November, she came to me and said, I want a Tim Quinn book for next year. And I was feeling particularly down at the period. And I thought, oh, God, I don't want to start writing a book. And then I thought, well, hang on, I could finish. I said, I've got a book that's all but finished, but I can't figure out the ending. And she said, well, I want it. You've got till January to finish it. So I came off and then I reread it and I thought, well, I like it. I really like it. But where do I go to from here? It was at that point I thought, well, I'm going to put Jane into the book as the love interest. But that still didn't solve the problem of how to end it. And then, much to my joy and much to the horror of some other people, there was a huge scandal that blew up in Great Britain that was covered by all the media. And the media did their usual bit of shock and horror. It was all connected to sex and God knows what. And I looked at it and I thought, that's exactly how we end this book. It's perfect ending. And it's the only way I can go out. So I'm very thankful to this poor sod who was done over by the press for idiotic reasons back at the end of last year, because he gave me the spark that I could use to finish this book. So yeah, there's luck for you, my luck, and if not his.
Well, a little bit of synchronicity and timing and all those good things.
Well, that's the word. That's the word. And synchronicity has been with me through my whole life. No question. Synchronicity has been, I've done seemingly impossible things, which there's no way that, I've been asked, did you have a plan? Absolutely never had a plan whatsoever. I was clueless as to how to create a plan. But one thing led to another. I knocked on a door and it would be opened by somebody who would take me in and lead me on to greater things. So very, very lucky. Right through to so there I am working for the Saturday Evening Post magazine. And I think, well, this is my opportunity to reach out to Stan Lee. And so that week I wrote to Stan. I also wrote to Yoko Ono. Both responded positively. And so it went right through to, these last few years where, I've got in with Rogue Best and Pete Best running this most wonderful of Beatle museums in the heart of Liverpool. We bumped into each other when we were both managing bands, and we laughed a lot because of what we were being put through as managers.
I bet.
So we had that common ground, and that common ground has just grown through the years. And
So perhaps you'll have a little more synchronicity, because I think this book would make an excellent movie, if not a little mini series. And
well,
I hope that perhaps you can get that to go.
you are bang on, because, and I'm not being big-headed or arrogant when I say this, but it would. it absolutely would. And I would imagine as a filmmaker, the joy of capturing each period from the 50s
Of
to the
course, it'd be
present
great.
day
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
following a guy through that. As an actor, could you imagine getting that role and having all the joys of being 17 years of age and picking up a guitar for the first time and getting that first gig, and then balancing that against the sheer bloody misery of the stupidity of the music business today in so many ways? That's not to say there aren't great wonders out there, because of course there are, but it's not what it should be, and I fear that new and upcoming artists, as the Beatles were way back then, would find it much more difficult to be heard today.
Much more difficult.
Yeah, which is crazy, as we have all these outlets.
There's no real radio anymore. They don't really sell records
No.
anymore. It's all streaming, so it's very hard for people to catch fire.
Well, what's missing is the people with heart and soul, whether they're DJs or whatever, who got it, who figured this out and, love jumping on it and shouting out about it so that we in turn would hear. There's a lot that's missing, thanks to these cretins who are running these businesses now.
So I've been having just a fantastically fun conversation for just shy of an hour now with the author Tim Quinn, and we're gonna wind the show down a little bit. And you've told us all these incredible stories throughout the whole show, but I'm wondering if you have a story that you can share with us that's either beyond what you've told us, weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm gonna tell you a story about Jane, about my wife. Jane was, as I said, grew up in Indiana, a farm girl, and then something happened called 1964, February, and she tuned in and was turned on, and she dropped out at that minute, age 14. She was 14 at that point. Absolutely loved the Beatles, and she recognized that there was more than just the Beatles, that there was this whole army, this British invasion that was heading to America, and indeed heading her way in Indianapolis, because Indianapolis was key route on these tours. And so she saw this as an opportunity, because she wanted to be a part of this wonder that she had seen before her eyes, thanks to Ed Sullivan. And so she called up a teen magazine in New York City and said, "Hello, my name's Jane Gatewood. I've got an interview with those two English pop stars, Peter and Gordon. Would you be interested? They're coming to Indianapolis, and I've arranged that I'll be interviewing them. Would you be interested in running the interview?" To which, of course, the editor of this magazine, this being 64, said, "Yes, of course," because anything English, they couldn't wait to get it. So this allowed Jane to then contact Peter and Gordon's management and say, "I'm the correspondent with this magazine, teen magazine, and we'd very much like to do an interview with your boys," said this 14-year-old girl, just turned 14. "Can we make this happen?" And of course, the management said, "Yeah, you bet," because they wanted Peter and Gordon to be in this teen mag. So it was arranged that Jane would go and meet Peter and Gordon at their hotel. So off she sets, we have a photo of her on that very day, all done up, hair combed down, Beatles style. And she got to the hotel, and Peter met her in the foyer and said, okay, come on up to our room. We'll do the interview up in our room. So up she goes. There's Gordon. And Peter says, let's do it on the bed. Okay. Yeah. So Jane gets on the bed, back against the headboard. Gordon gets on one side of her, Peter on the other. She gets a notebook out. Her first question that she ever asked any pop or rock star is the one I'm about to tell you. But you have to know that Jane went on to do more interviews with pop and rock stars than anybody else on the planet through her life. And in fact, on her last day on this planet, she was still working on an interview. Her first question, though, was slightly quirky as she turned to Peter and said, so tell me, is your sister Jane's hair as red as yours? Because his sister, of course, was Jane Asher, who everybody was aware of because she was Paul McCartney's girlfriend and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he gave a nice answer. The interview carried on, some slightly more probing questions, all very nice. And at the end of the interview, she was saying, well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic afternoon. To which Gordon then said, well, we'd like you to stay because we've got something that we think you might enjoy. And Jane said, oh, what's that? Gordon said, I'm going to turn the TV on because Bonanza is about to start and it's followed with The Wonderful World of Disney. So for the next 2 hours, Jane sat there with Peter and Gordon. And that, dear listeners, was the day my darling wife, age 14, entered the heady world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll by watching The Wonderful World of Disney and Bonanza. I think that is one of the best stories ever because it captures the innocence of those times, whereas far too often we just talk about the seediness behind the scenes. And you know what? There was a certain amount of seediness, but there was also wonderful innocence as well at that moment in history. Years later, Jane and I were working with Peter Asher because he was launching the career of a wonderful singer called Iris Dement. And he'd brought her over to the UK at a theatre. And we go up to, this is the first time we've talked to Peter, we go up to him. And I say to him, oh, don't you recognise Jane? And he said, I don't think so, no. Who? Because we're now sort of in our, well, we've been around about 40, I guess, or age 39 or 40. So I tell him the story. I said, well, you and Gordon, she interviewed you back when she was 14 in your hotel bedroom, to which he looked slightly shocked and he said, oh, were we nice? And Jane said, you were both beautiful gentlemen. And he went, phew. I'm glad to hear it. so bless his heart.
Peter Asher, am I correct, eventually went on to work with the Beatles at Apple.
Yeah, big story there. You know, we're working at Apple as head of whatever, Apple Records, I think.
I think it was head of A&R or something like that.
Well, then he brought in James Taylor, and he left Apple when Apple started collapsing, and to become the manager of and producer of James Taylor. And then went on to Linda Ronstadt, I think, as well. Many other names, anyway, that he worked with. So, yeah, fantastic. But at the start of his career, of course, thanks to Jane, his sister, knowing Paul McCartney, Peter and Gordon were given, World Without Love.
And he now does a really wonderful show on Sirius XM on the Beatles channel about the Beatles. He does a show.
Well, no better person, because he was there throughout.
Yeah,
there were people who were in that envious position of seeing, a few insiders. The Beatles chose well the people they brought in, I have to say, in most cases.
Well, and they probably had the choice of the crop is what they probably had, too. They could bring in whoever they wanted at some point.
Well, then there's the wonderful Derek Taylor, who, was a true fifth Beatle in every respect, and a very close, dear friend of mine and Jane's. And certainly, again, listeners, I think there's about 5 books that are essential to anybody who loves the Beatles. Now, I'm going to add 6 now because I'm going to say bigger than the Beatles should be on that list. But one of them is definitely by Derek Taylor, and it's called As Time Goes By. And it's such an insider's take on those years, those amazing years. Brilliantly written as only Derek could. He had such a wry, Merseyside style humor. Brilliant, wonderful man.
Readers should check out that, and of course, bigger than the Beatles as well. So last question for you today, Tim, in this marvelous chat that we're having. You've given us huge, great thoughts to think about, especially with your career and how it unfolded and went off in various directions. But do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those in schools or wherever who come up to you and say, how do I get into the business? What do I do? What kind of a tip do you like to give those folks?
I don't. I don't because I feel it would be slightly arrogant for somebody who got into the business back at the tail end of the 60s to think they know how to get into the business today because it's a completely different planet we're living on. Mm-hmm. But I guess, number one, tell you what, and this comes from when I was working for Marvel Comics, and we would do comic conventions, and people would come and bring their artwork and show and try and get work from Marvel. And inevitably, just about everybody who showed me their work would start by saying this, it's not very good, this, but to which I would, of course, have to say, well, why are you showing it me then? Because if you don't believe it's good, now, they actually probably felt it was as good as they could do. And they were humbled in my presence, ho-ho, or humbled because, guess what, they're now in front of somebody who's working for Marvel Comics. So I kind of get that. But here is the advice I would give anybody. You've got to believe in your stuff. You've really got to believe in your stuff. Because if you don't, why should anybody else believe in it? So you've got to believe in it. And it's got to almost cross that line into arrogance. So you've got to believe in yourself that much. And if you don't, then get a good agent. But you've got a problem there because there aren't any. Much better. If you believe in yourself, then you will be able to sell yourself because that's part of the game as well. You've got to get in there and make people believe who you are. But you have to believe in who you are to begin with. Totally, And I certainly did that when I first got into comics because I have a limited talent, a very limited talent. But I teamed up with a guy called Dickie Howard. And Dickie is the most arrogant person I've ever met on the planet. And I kind of recognized this could be a good thing, actually. So we won't describe ourselves as, we're trying to break into comics or we're trying to do this, but we described ourselves as the best thing in comics. We were the best thing ever to the comic books. So it's absurd, but you start believing that. And then assuming that you do actually believe in what you're creating, what you're writing, that you do have something, then it becomes natural. You do believe what you're doing and you do believe there's an audience out there. And of course, once you do get something out there and you hit that audience, then your belief in yourself goes through skyrockets. And so it goes, but you do need to have that belief to begin with. No mean feat, again, but you got to believe, and a lot of artists are these kind of people who just want to tinker with a piece of work. Every artist I ever worked with always brought me their illustrations and said, I'm sorry, Tim, but I had to hit the deadline. Well, yeah, damn right, you've got to hit the deadline. But when I looked at their work, it was fantastic. But of course, in their heads, they're so close to it that they can't see that. They need a 6-month break from it, and then they'll come back and they'll say, "Oh, actually, it was all right, wasn't it?" So you got to get over that. You got to get over yourself, basically, and believe.
Well, I think that's extremely valuable advice because once you believe in yourself strongly enough to get others to even look at your work and they don't think that you're being shy or coy or whatever, but in fact that you believe in your own work and that grows into a further audience, that is exactly what it takes to then further believe in yourself. So it's a self-perpetuating circle.
It is. I would also say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Hence, I have many baskets
extremely valuable advice.
and many eggs. But if you feel you can write, well, there's many areas that can work. From interviewing people through writing novels, through writing comic books, through writing features in newspapers and magazines. Just the world is way open. Through writing movies.
I made the mistake of having all my eggs in one basket at one time, and it really bit me. And so that's never happened again. I've always had multiple things going on at the same time. So I think that's fantastic advice. Tim Quinn, this has been a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat. And folks, you should go out and get Bigger Than the Beatles by Tim Quinn. I think you'll have a fantastic time reading it, especially if you like the 60s rock and roll, the Beatles, et cetera, et cetera. It's well worth your time. Tim, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and especially for all your great wisdom. Just keep on keeping on, would you please?
My great wisdom, my God. Thank you so much, Steve. It's always a delight. And thank you, Kristen, in the background, producer. So many thanks both.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.